Tyres should be your only contact patch with the ground. And they create all the amazing things that make mountain biking brilliant. They provide the grip, the traction, the control. But is the old logic smashed? Is fatter faster? Let's find out. A wider tyre, to a point, can offer more grip, more traction, and lower rolling resistance, and a smoother ride. What? No, that's not right. Fat tyres can't roll quicker. I mean, the Tour de France guys and all those roadies are on really skinny rubber because that's what rolls quickest, isn't it? Skinny rubber. Cross-country races are the same, right? Yeah, you're right, roadies do run skinny tyres, but not as skinny as they used to. No, they used to run around a 23mm tyre, and now, even at the Tour de France, where they get their roads remade for them, so they're silky smooth, well, lots of them are running kind of 30 or 32mm tyres, and that's because the science is there to prove that, well, they can roll quicker. And if Tour de France guys, who all they do is pedal on really smooth surfaces, have gone up, well, around 40% in tyre size, well, maybe we should look at what tyre size we're running. Anyway, how do we judge what is skinny and what is fat? Well, we always had 2.1s, but how did we end up with a 2.1 tyre? Let's find out. Mountain bikes originally started with, well, a hand-me-down tyre. So we had this 2.1 size because of, well, chance more than design, because it was a readily available size. And for a long time, even though bikes evolved amazingly, we were kind of trapped or stuck with this 2.1 width. Yes, knob size and tread patterns evolved greatly, but we were wedded to this 2.1 width. Yes, there was some experimentation. Specialized, amongst others, did some wild, wide, mid-90s rubber that were 2.5, but for a long, long time, 235 was the sort of uppermost width of tyre. Then I think a combination of tubeless tyres and this sort of wheel size revolution that we had really moved the needle on getting wider tyres. Yes, there were fat bikes, but they were pretty much wedded to sort of sand dunes and snowscapes, and it was really the 29er and 650B, or 27.5 size, that really moved the needle, and we got lots more sizes. And we've got to make a brief mention to the wonder that's lost in the mists of time of 650B plus or 27.5 plus that, well, bubbled up from, we're not quite sure where, and some brands pitched it as a bike packing tool and other brands pitched it as, well, a do-everything burly trail size. But essentially we're talking about a 275 tyre that was in a 2.6-ish to 2.8-ish, really big. And whilst that size is, well, pretty much deflated away, we've still got the remnants of that, because now we've got lots of big size tyres and lots of bikes that fit big tyres, because that was the other problem. If you haven't got a frame space for a big tyre, well, you can't fit it in because your wheels, they won't go round. We talk about contact patch, and, well, what is it? Well, contact patch or tread contact patch is literally the kind of like little edge of the tyre that's in contact with the ground, and you might be surprised at how small of an area it actually is. This small patch gives you everything that a tyre can give. So it gives you that traction, it gives you that control, it gives you all that feedback to know when the tyre is sliding and when it's gripping. So it's really key. We're going to experiment with different widths of tyre, because that means that we can change this contact patch and give us a slightly bigger one. There's other ways of changing the contact patch shape, which is by changing the diameter of the tyre. I should touch that by changing the width of the tyre, we're changing the volume of the tyre, which does change the diameter a little bit, but it's not as much as if we were moving from, say, like a 26-inch wheel up to a 29 or even a 32, because changing that outside diameter really changes how that contact patch interacts with the ground. We're going to stick with the same diameter tyres, but different widths. The contact patch will be different. The other thing that's going to change with that contact patch, if we were to change tyres, would be, well, how those knobs interact with the ground and how they bite into the ground. And that's also really important on this topic. So we've chosen the same tyre to do our experiment because it should give us a really similar feel for how those tread patterns interact, how those lugs bite into the trail. But you could get different reactions from different tyres and different widths and different knob patterns in different conditions, because that surface area of that contact patch. We're partnered with Vittoria and we're going to run one of their tyres for this experiment. Why have we chosen the Mezcal? Well, the Mezcal's a really nice cross-country tyre and it rides really nicely across lots of different terrain. We're also going to use it because it comes in a really wide range. The tread pattern does change subtly, and I mean really subtly between the different sizes. But for our experiment, we're going to stick to proper mountain bike sizes, so 2.1, 2.4 and 2.6. And all three of those tyres, because they are different volumes, are going to weigh slightly differently. Okay, we've talked a little bit about how we're going to have different widths of tyre and thus different volumes. And that means if we're changing the volume, we also need to be mindful about changing the tyre pressure that we work with. Why? Well, for me, the physics on why is pretty heavy. Boyle's law interacts with it a little bit, but my understanding it isn't great. And I think a better example is, well, we've got more space to play with. So if you think of where the rim is and you think about where the bottom of the tyre is with a bigger carcass, well, we've got more space compared to the big tyre compared to the small. So if we think about that as a bit like suspension sag, if we're setting the same sag on different systems, that's fair. And that's what we've got to do with the tyre pressure, because the bike will sag into its pressure. So with a higher volume, we can run a lower pressure. The bike can stay sagged a little bit deeper. Conversely, with a skinnier tyre, to get that same amount of sag, we've got to run a higher pressure because our volume is smaller. It is a bit complicated and it is a bit nuanced, but we are going to use a pressure gauge and pressure chart to work out what we need to run. As we've discussed in, well, quite a few other videos, setting your tyre pressure is an essential. It's really important to make sure you're getting the right pressure. And that's because, well, that contact patch can change so much when you're playing around with pressure. And I think the other thing is to reinforce, a bit like bedding in your brakes is a simple, free task that you can do and it boosts your performance hugely. It is a no-brainer. Yes, you might need a digital gauge and yes, it can be a bit of a faff, but it's one of those free upgrades that makes a big difference. So, back to pressures and back to volumes. Because we're running different sizes of tyres, we're going to have to run different pressures. Vittoria has got a fantastic website where it's got a really detailed pressure gauge sort of chart. And you put in lots of different metrics and it gives you different pressures. There's lots of different parameters, but it's really simple to use. And with that, we've got some different pressures for these different size tyres. 2.1, front 22 psi, rear 23 psi. 2.4, front 20 psi, rear 22 psi. 2.6, front 18 psi, rear 19 psi. Whilst those pressure differences might not sound a huge amount, actually it's more than 15%. So think about it this way. If you're setting up your suspension on your bike, which essentially is what we're doing when we're setting our air pressure on our tyres, well, if you got it out, you know, measured the sag 15% wrong, well, your suspension wouldn't work as it's meant to. Or the other way to think about it is if you had 15% discount or you had to pay 15% more, well, either way, it is quite a big difference. So it does matter. So use the online apps. You've got the Vittoria one. There's lots of others available as well. And it does make a really big difference to how well your bike grips and tracks and, well, rolls. So check your tyre pressure. Right, okay, cool. Now we've got all the tyres, 2.6, 2.4, 2.1. Now's the fun bit of finding a bit of trail and trying them all out. But yeah, first to get them on a bike. Whoa. Okay, we're on the 2.1s. Oh, we're climbing. Bit of wheel spin there. I think that's just, well, poor climbing technique from me. To be honest, on the flatter sections, I think there's a sort of like a fast feeling from the feedback of the tyre because the tyre pressure I've had to run, it feels quite pingy. I'm kind of almost losing traction a little bit early. I think that's where you can notice it quite a lot is over the roots. It's leaning into the suspension, riding flats, and it's quite subtle, but I think I can feel like I've got to concentrate on my foot placement a bit more with a skinnier tyre. Maybe that's happening. But they do feel light and lively. It is wonderfully dry in the woods at the moment. So I think that is interesting in terms of it is looser. Right, Okay, I can definitely feel slightly lack of braking. I think that's down to, well, a smaller footprint. I mean, it feels fast because I can step the back out. Almost lost a foot there on the pedals. Need to concentrate. Okay, now we're on the 2.4s, and well, we're straight into a bit of a technical climb, but we were just on a little bit of fire road, and yeah, I thought I'd noticed the difference of the tyres, but seated, I haven't felt that yet. In terms of, I thought I would feel sort of them being smoother or faster rolling, but I haven't noticed that. Let's see what happens when we get in the technical stuff. Okay, interesting. Yeah, it is subtle, but there is just a little bit more of a damped ride with this tyre. It's like I can be a little bit more lazy on climb choice, and I'm able to get away with it. Just the extra tyre, at least it feels like that. I mean, that could be psychological, couldn't it? Oh, I'm unfit. Okay, into the downhill section. Yes, definitely more comfortable. Bit more grip, bit more control, bit more confidence. That's fun. It's subtle, but it's there. Okay, we've got 2.6s on, and wow, okay. There's a definite difference. There's definitely a bit more kind of like perception. Maybe it's the sound on the flat of the sort of, I guess, a tiny bit of drag, but this is where it's interesting, isn't it? Like, we can measure so much, but it depends on the trail and where you're riding. Right, okay, into the more technical stuff, and I mean, yes, I think there is a little bit of a weight difference, but wow, it just rolls over everything. I'm actually trying to search for the rougher bits. And again, today is really dry, so that is an additional factor. If it was wet, well, does my frame have clearance? That's one factor. The other factor is we've got such a floaty platform. Is that actually going to bite into the terrain? Lots of factors. But it is lovely and dry. And in the dry, all these wonderful big working edges and this low pressure. Oh, it's great. Into the downhill section. Okay, okay. That is something that now I can notice is I've got a lot more braking traction. Again, it's in the dry, but just the extra carcass, extra width, extra knobs on the ground, I've got loads more braking edge. Okay, I think that's probably enough insights from me. I think, even as I am a bit of a bike nerd, I think it'd be good to get some thoughts and, well, actual science of what's going on, and who better to chat to than Ken Avery, the alpha tyre nerd. Here he is, from Victoria. Okay, we're joined by Ken Avery, who is, well, is it Vice Principal of Product Development, or are you like the product developer guy? I know that you're the tyre design man.
Yeah, I work on the innovation team globally. My title is SVP Product Development, but I usually just tell people I draw pictures and talk about it. I'm a real rider. I love doing this, and I like making things, that real riders use to, conquer their goals. So that's really kind of how I define my role.
Okay, perfect. I guess I want to cut to the chase, because people want to know, is a fatter tyre actually faster?
Yeah, sometimes. It's not a universal truth. And it's all about picking the right tire for the right terrain. having the right tread pattern, having the right pressure, and really approaching this as a tire system. It really comes down to deformation, right? And so this is going to depend on a few things. Wheel diameter, right? So you go up in a wheel diameter, you're going to have like a bit of a longer contact patch. Of course, if you go wider in the tire, the contact patch is also going to get wider in that way. This all is going to depend on how much pressure you have, but having the right amount of deformation in a static sense will kind of dictate your contact patch. But really what it comes down to is consider every time the tire rolls underneath you, right, of that little contact patch, and it's perpetually happening, right, that little spot is deforming. And so that can lead, to rolling resistance and such. And that's going to be dependent on the casing construction, the materials that we use, as well as the compound and the tread design itself. Now, obviously, you can only fit a certain size tire within your frame, right? So in general, we usually say, sizing up within reason is an advantage. And, it's funny, we have a 2.4 cross-country tire now called the Peyote, and that actually has like a completely different take on things that we've applied through our new cross-country race lineup. And that uses actually a 60 TPI casing, which historically is quite thick in terms of construction. But what that does is balance the deformation of the casing to the tread and allows that entire construct to deform uniformly. And so it makes use of that volume in a way that actually increases speed while it increases grip because it's more supple. So at the contact patch, you're making better use of that patch and that friction with that whatever surface you're on. In that case, it's going to be sort of like hard packed to find loose kind of terrain. And that makes the tire not only roll faster, but grip better. And that's actually really tough to do as a product designer. How do you make something grippier and then faster at the same time? And it all comes down to this deformation. And part of that, to come back to the topic of this call, is actually tire size.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. That's really, really insightful. And it feels like, people may have more questions about tyres, and if they do, we'll stick them in the comments below. But Ken, thank you so much. I feel like it won't be the last that will get you on the tech channel, so thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
Wow, thank you very much, Ken. That was great. I mean, it's always great to get insights from the industry, and even more so when it's the person that's, literally designed the tyre and thought about how the carcass and how the tread all interact to make a better tyre. So, back to that original question, are fatter tyres faster? Well, I think it's like a lot of things with mountain bike and in life, it's all about balance. So for a modern cross-country racer, they've got to balance lots of things. They've got to have that speed in climbing and rolling efficiency, but they need a burlier tyre for the burly modern cross-country courses. So I think that's why that 2.4 size is really good for cross-country races and actually probably a lot of trail riders too, because it's that really good balance between the more grip, the more control, the more traction, and it rolls quite well as well, but it's not too heavy, because that's the factors that you've got to play with. That's the balance and priorities that you've got to make. But I think if you're riding, and this is where it comes down to it in terms of how you decide on which is the right tyre, it all depends on where you're riding. I'm not a cross-country racer, and I quite like the sort of burlier technical trails and the burlier downhills, and I'm not the most skillful rider, so I'm looking for every advantage that I can get. And the bigger tyres, because they can deform more around the terrain, if it's dry, then I can, get away with those big tyres, and they do offer me loads more grip. And I talk about and touch upon trail conditions, and that's another really big factor that it's easy to overlook. I'm assuming that you're riding in the same trail conditions, in the same trail that I am. And that's, never the case, because no two riders are alike and no two trail conditions are alike either. It's quite interesting that if we were to take that big 2.6 tyre and try and ride it in really muddy, sloppy conditions, it might not have the bite. And that's not just because it doesn't have the tread pattern of a sort of more open, more aggressive tyre. It's also spreading out that load over a bigger surface area. And that means, like pins on a pedal, if you've got too many pins, you're not going to get the traction. The tyre and the lugs aren't going to bite into the terrain. So it is nuanced and it is complex. Right, back to that original question, which is better? I think if you've got the space and you're riding in kind of more general trail conditions, trying to squeeze in the biggest tyre that you can get away with is a good thing, because it offers up so much more traction, so much more control and comfort without too much of a limitation of slower rolling. But the perfect tyre? Well, that's for you to decide. Let me know what your perfect tyre is in the comments below. Me, I'm going to try and shoehorn some of those 2.1 tyres into my gravel bike. I know, that might be triggering, but I think it's indicative of just how far mountain bikes and gravel bikes have gone, that what was, for a decade long, the standard tyre, a 2.1, is now almost considered a gravel tyre. Right, let me know your thoughts in the comments below.